She moved out of her house when she was 16, and I asked her if she felt like an orphan at that point. And she said, 6 years ago, the Lord showed me that I struggled with an orphan spirit. A lot of the things that Kate said after that in that like short sentence, because the Lord said to me, this is why you can't see me as a good father. And so I was like, oh my gosh, even if you have the most perfect family situation, and they're still human. And so we still have a very flawed picture of who God is as our Father, because the only way we can possibly compare him to is humans. I think that my dad's a police officer. There's no situation that you could be in that's fully safe. He doesn't see safety in situations, which means I was raised not to see safety in situations. I have escape plans wherever I go. Like I have to have a way that I can like, oh, if things go south, this is what I'm doing. I thought that my dad loved us out of obligation of like, well, I love you because you're my children. I didn't ever feel like he loved me for me. I didn't understand God's love because God loves me because he has to, because he says he loves all of his children. But does God like me?
Welcome to the Broken to Build podcast, a refuge for authenticity. Each episode, you'll be reminded that our scars are the foundation of our strengths. You will feel seen, known, and loved as you find beauty in the brokenness while you build the extraordinary life you were created to live.
Welcome to the Broken to Build podcast. This is a special episode. This was an unplanned episode. We are here because the last week's episode that aired, Kate East had an amazing testimony, and she shared with us, and I got a revelation through her sharing that the Lord told me that I struggled with the orphan spirit, which is why I don't see him as a good father. So I have just been processing over the last week, and I feel like so much revelation has come to me. And so I just wanted to bring you guys on the journey because I'm guessing there's a lot of people that struggle with this. I would not have called it an orphan spirit, but I'm like, holy cow, like this is me. This is what I struggle with. So we're just going to dive right in. I have invited all-time fave Melissa Perry here to process together. So she will be interviewing, but then also sharing some insights as well. I hope so.
Yes. Yes, I will.
So we're just going to jump in.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Where do you want to start?
Okay. I kind of felt like, first of all, what was it that the Lord spoke over you during that time? Like what was the moment? And then let's kind of process through just that.
Yeah. So when Kate was sharing that she moved out of her house when she was 16. Actually, I don't know if you've listened to Kate's episode yet, but there were several things that she was sharing that I was like, wow, you and Melissa have very similar stories, similar pasts, all the things. But she moved out of her house when she was 16, and I asked her if she felt like an orphan at that point. And she said, it's funny that you ask. No, I didn't at that point feel like that, but 6 years ago, the Lord showed me that I struggled with an orphan spirit. And I heard the Lord say to me, I didn't even actually hear a lot of the things that Kate said after that in that like short sentence, because the Lord said to me, this is why you can't see me as a good father. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So then I shared that with Kate and asked her to expand on what the orphan spirit is, because I've heard the term, but I wasn't super familiar with, well, what does that even look like? So that was a week ago, and I delved in. I read a whole audiobook called An Orphan No More by Rocky Fleming. It was amazing, really cool insight on God and this guy's, version of what the orphan spirit looks like. And so, I've just been processing, woke up at 4:45 this morning and just spent time with the Lord and got some really cool revelation on it. And so I'm hopeful that as people come on this journey, that they will maybe get some revelation about their lives, but then also the freedom that comes with it.
Yeah. It's funny because on the episode you had with Lauren Pruse, you said something to her, you questioned her, like, how do you see God? Do you see him as that same father? How did that correlate with the father you have on earth to the Father you see as God.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to ask you that to start too, is where's the root? What was the space that you first felt? It's almost, so with the orphan spirit, it's almost this self-protection because you can't control the outside world.
Yeah.
Right? Because you've had to self-protect. You've had to learn to survive on your own. And it's an example of somebody who is fatherless or doesn't have a strong father. A strong father's love. So where was that? What was it growing up for you?
Yeah. I will answer that. I guess the other piece to that I thought was interesting that was brought up in this book, the guy was saying, because when we look at our parents, we only have earthly parents. Like there is no, even if you have the most perfect family situation and my mom's awesome and my dad's awesome, they're still human. Right. And so we still have a very flawed picture of who God is as our Father, because the only way we can possibly compare him to is humans. Yeah. And so, I think when I was little and, my dad is a great dad. My mom's a great mom. I think that it's just an interesting question. Like, I think that my dad's a police officer or retired. And so I think that there's no situation that you could be in that's fully safe. Right. So meaning like he doesn't see safety in situations, which means I was raised not to see safety in situations. So I have escape plans wherever I go. Like I have to have a way that I can like, oh, if things go south, this is what I'm doing. Yeah. And, or with people or with business, like it's always like, well, I have to have a plan B, C, D, because what if this goes south? Nothing is safe. And then the other piece to that for me, like, my dad, he said this to me a couple years ago. We were talking about, he had like a physical coming up and he was like, he said, I've been pretty lucky with my health so far, but I figure at some point the shoe's got to drop. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's where I get it.
Yeah,
like
there's such power in your tongue.
Yeah. And I was like, that is where, and I've always seen God as a father that's like, okay, it could be a little good, but not too good. Because the other shoe's got to drop. Like you don't learn when you're living in abundance and happy and joyful and everything's going your way. And you only learn in the really hard times. So God doesn't want us to be too happy.
Right. Right.
And so that piece of it as well for me has been, so when my dad said that, it just gave me revelation. And so through this book that I was reading, he was asking questions like, do you trust God? Do you see God as a safe God? Do you see, and I was like, no, like, that's why I try to control things. Like, if I'm being really honest, like, I know he loves me in the, well, you're my child, I love you type thing. Yeah. But, and I even felt that way as a child, like when I was processing, I know this to be different now, but when I was a child, I thought that my dad loved us out of obligation of like, well, I love you because you're my children. Mm-hmm. I didn't ever feel like he loved me for me. Mm-hmm. I felt like,
why?
I could be anyone. I think it goes back to, and this is what Rocky Fleming proposed in his book, that it's a feeling of unworthiness. Yeah. And so I felt like I wasn't worthy of love. Mm. And so, so I think going back to that, I didn't understand God's love because God loves me because he has to, because he says he loves all of his children. But does God like me? Mm-hmm. Like, does he want to hang out with me? Mm-hmm. Does he, all these things like, okay, you love me in general because you're God and you have to love people. Mm-hmm. But like, are you trustworthy? Are you safe? Do you want want me to delight in things here on earth? Like I had all these like and I still am journeying through the misconceptions of like, God, I've seen you so wrong. And so I'm still like, it's been a week and it's just heavy, like me processing through it.
Yeah. I think I love that he's taking you on this journey, because I think in the end, the enemy wants to keep us from knowing the love of our Father, the real, truest love.
Yes.
Like we can't even fathom this kind of love, that there's nothing that we can do to separate us from that. Yeah. Nothing. Like you don't have to do anything. But you're saying, I understand that love. I'm starting to understand that love. But the love comes with, are you going to provide? Are you going to protect?
Right.
Does that come into play, or is that what you're saying? I should ask.
Yes.
That's what you felt. You love, but there's stipulations.
Yeah. Like, yes, you love, but like, I was also watching another podcast, and this girl was not relating the love of God as a father to us as his kids. She was relating physical parents. And she's like, when you're a kid, you just expect for everything to be okay. Like your parents, they've got it. Like you're not worried about where your next meal's coming from. I mean, some people are, but for the most part, like, I'm not worried about like safety and provision and all of those things, because it's like my parents got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you never wonder about that. And she's like, then when you get older and you're like, oh my gosh, my parents were like real people and they were like, it might not be okay. All of a sudden we lose that childlike faith.
Yeah.
Because we see the real world and it's like, oh, it might not be okay. And I feel this invitation from God that he's like, come back to that. Come back to like, I'm your dad and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I think you're right. I think the enemy tries to keep us from knowing that love, because there is such freedom in that love. And when we live under the orphan spirit, we live in that limitation.
Yep.
And so I think you're absolutely right.
And so fear is being scared. Right. And so there's scared, you often like want to keep everything in place
and control it
and in control, but then you're so limited. Right. Your mindset is limited. Your life is limited. And God's like, I have so much more for you, but yet you want to stay here. Right. Because of the unknown. Sometimes it's scary just to be like, God, like, I don't think you're going to provide for me.
Right.
Like he wants you to come to him and cast all your cares on him.
Yeah. And
that might include like the ugly raw stuff. Like I actually have never seen you show up for me in this way financially, or in this way in this, or, and I think that's sometimes the hardest part, is being real. Right. So in that space of what he's brought out in you, even just this week, what is the hard yuck kind of conversation you've had to have with him?
I think the yuck part has been for me, like the repentance, even though repentance isn't yuck, like the repentance of like, God, I've got it so wrong. Like I've had it so wrong, who you are and who you see me as. And so, yeah, I think that's been the hardest thing to kind of work through. But I also think kind of to touch on what you were just saying, do you remember when you sent me that voice memo that you had a dream about me, and there was some sort of house, like a bachelor pad in LA type house.
Yes.
And I actually went back and listened to that voice memo. You can tell the dream because it was your dream.
I like hardly remember it, but I remember it being beautiful. Your house was stunning.
Yeah.
Your kids were in there. Aaron was in there.
Yeah. And you were talking about this dream that you had, and you said, you were like, oh, Aaron must be doing really, really well. And all of a sudden, whether God told you or you just knew, oh, this is not Erin, this is Lauren. Like, this is
her faith, your faith.
Her faith, her, you know. And so I replayed that because there was something inside me that brought that to my memory. And I was thinking, I think that getting rid of the orphan spirit and living the way that God created me to live is part of that dream, there is something so beautiful on the other side of that.
Yeah.
If I can push through this like repentance and feeling unworthy and like all of those things. And I was kind of internally processing this. And then on Sunday, Aaron said to me, he's like, you know, I think this is a big thing, that once you get past this, I think that God's got some big things on the other side. Like, I think this is the key that unlocks a lot of the things that the Lord has shown you that he has for you. And so I told him, I was like, you have to listen to this message that Melissa sent me.
I had that
a while ago, months and months ago.
Yeah.
And
before even the dream of the podcast came. Like,
it was
right before that. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, you should do a podcast.
Yeah.
You should do this. You should do that. Like, yeah.
So when I had him listen to that, I was like, I've been feeling that. And then when Aaron said it, it was just more confirmation, because it was just, it just kind of came out of nowhere.
Does that scare you?
No.
Good.
I think it would have scared me a while ago, but I'm ready, and I've seen bits and pieces of the freedom that's on the other side of getting rid of this. And so
so let me ask you, what is God saying to you about who you are or how he sees you?
I think it's been a huge identity shift. And speaking of, I'm going to open my journal, because I was up at 4:45 this morning and just praying and delving into scripture, and the Lord brought me to first Psalm 17, and the verse that stuck out to me is Psalm 17:8. Keep me as the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings. And I was reading through all of Psalm 17, but that verse particularly jumped out at me. And so then I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, keep me as the apple of your eye. So I was cross-referencing that. And in Deuteronomy 32, he also says, he shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. And so I was digging in. And so the Hebrew word is Ishon, and it means apple or little man. Which I thought was really interesting. I was like, little man, like, what does that even mean? And then the Lord showed me, like, the pupil is us. Like, we are the little man. We are made in his image. And so the modern understanding of the apple of someone's eye, like if someone says, like, my child is the apple of my eye, it means someone that's loved and highly cherished. It's significant. It signifies a person who holds a special place in someone's heart. And so God began to reveal to me that, like, it's not a blanket love that I just have for everyone. Like, this signifies that you are special, like, in my sight. Like, I don't love you the way that I love Melissa. Like, Melissa is the apple of my eye, but she's different. I am the apple of his eye in a very unique and special way. And so I started to dig into, because some of the translations say he keeps me as the pupil of your eye, or he guards him as the pupil of your eye. And so I started to dig in to what the pupil is. And the pupil its job is to regulate light and vision. And so I was praying, and I was like, God, like, what is the correlation between this? And God said, remember when I told you that the orphan spirit is why you can't see me as a good father? Just as when the pupil is damaged, it will lead to blurred vision and sensitivity to light. The orphan spirit damages the lens in which you see me. our vision is blurred, so we can't see him as a good father. And we become sensitive to his light in a way that causes us to shy away, that we're not worthy. That, when someone goes to the eye doctor and their pupils get dilated, they have to wear those funny sunglasses because they can't take the light. It's too much. And so the damage causes us to not see him as full of love or trust him fully. And his light is so bright that we don't feel worthy to receive all that he's offering us as his children.
Yeah. That's so good.
It was like, oh my gosh, God, like, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, it just, it was amazing.
It's funny because I can see all the things he sees in you. He sees about you. That's just how my heart works. That's like my gift. I can see that he has risen you up and he has this unbelievable gift inside of you. And he loves you and he's proud of you and you've drawn near to him in so many moments of your life. And your faith is one of the strongest out of anyone I know. Like, so Nick and I always talk about that. It's like, even though you feel scared, there's a faith that has moved you. And when you connect it, you move. It's like pure obedience. I never question that in you. And like, God just constantly is just telling me, like, under his wing, you can have fun. You can be you. Yeah. You've been created to play. You've been created for joy. You've been created for these connections. And do whatever you want underneath my wing because I got you. Yeah. I'm protecting you. I will provide for you under there. That's part of that verse. Yes. And you can play and do all the things, but don't leave that wing.
Right.
Because that outside of that is where the enemy wants you to go.
Yeah.
But you are called higher. You're like, with this podcast even, I remember it's like, oh, let's do this together. I'm like, no, this is yours.
Let's do this. Let's not me do this alone.
This is yours.
That's a bad idea.
And you have already impacted so many people by your obedience and trust in the Lord. And so now he's just undoing this in front of everybody for you to experience. Welcome, everybody.
Awesome. It's an awesome journey.
But it is. It's like part of that process is we're on our own journeys and he wants you to see his love. He wants everyone to experience his love that's been hidden because of the lies of the enemy.
Yeah.
Because of our parents who are just like us, doing it so unsure and scared, but yet we have to trust the Lord. And either they did or they didn't. But if we start viewing them as those little children, those little kids, like the way God sees them, there's a difference. Then suddenly is that shift is like, okay, it's okay. They're them. They are walking in their own journeys.
Yeah.
But like the love of my Father is the truest love that it will ever experience. I can't even, it's so like overwhelming.
Yeah.
That you can't help but share it and see it and do it. And you are walking through that and you're experiencing that.
There's been moments where when I think about that and I think about like true love, like God's true love, and this is going to sound maybe Christianese, but it's like I can breathe a little bit deeper. Like my shoulders physically like can relax because I'm like, oh, I don't have to control everything. Like I don't have to have plan B, C, and D in case God doesn't come through.
Yeah.
Like what would that feel like on a physical level if I lived my life like that? Like I could have fun under under his wing. I could be like, okay. And I had to put some of that into practice this week. Like when we had some financial stuff and I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And then I was going through with Aaron. I was like, okay, do I I was like, do I quit filming the podcast? What do I need, what about finances? And then I caught myself and I was like, or I could let God be God and be like, I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's my first human reaction is fear and control. Okay, how do I control this? Because this much money is coming in and this much is going out and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But then it was like, or I could pray about it and let God be God and long story, but I had told Aaron, I was like, hey, it's it's March 6th and we get paid once a month. So I'm like, it's March 6th. We have $300 left.
Yeah.
Here's all of the things, that we had that came up. And by the end of yesterday, when I texted him that in the morning, and then I was like, I'm going to choose that God is going to be God and that he's going to take care of this.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, we had way more than quadruple that because we had an investment that we lost money on, but we lost a lot of money on it, but the money left over came in.
Wow.
And I was like, so Aaron woke me up last night.
Aww.
And he was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, he's like, I know that we were talking about this but he's like, but we started the day with $300 for the rest of the month, and this money came in. It wasn't what we were expecting. It wasn't as much as we were expecting, but that's what God did. And then it hit. I was like, I don't have to have a plan B.
Yeah.
He's going to do it, and I can trust that.
Such a peace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So taking that as application, we have to recognize it. Right. And so often I find that for my story of the orphan spirit, it really was the gym was so exhausting. It was very hard. Clients, people, managing it all. You're trying to gain in people while other people leave. You're constantly trying to grind in that type of place. Yes. And the first few years were great, but then after those years, it was so tough. And it was tough on Nick. So I should say I was carrying Nick. Yeah. It wasn't that I didn't trust that.
Nick should be here.
Yeah, Nick really should be here. It wasn't that I didn't trust God to provide, because that's not really necessarily my weakness. I always just have this mindset God's going to do it.
It's going to work out.
It's going to work out. Aaron and I, that's how we connect so well. It's going to work. Yeah. It's just, you just got to do it.
Yeah.
But what I was carrying was my husband, who was the provider and protector of our family in the physical form, and sitting there being questioning, worrying, scared, plan A, plan B, plan C coming into play. I am in fix it mode. What am I supposed to do, God? How can I fix this? And he just said, no, this is not of me. That's not who I am. Come to me, draw it to me.
You can't fix it.
You can't fix this.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for 8 years of our wilderness journey, that's what God was trying to do, was strip us of the orphan spirit. And in the stripping, he revealed to us that was something that we both had in a way, in our own ways.
Yeah. I was going to ask the difference between the way that showed up in both of your lives.
Mine was in the striving that I wasn't enough in God's eyes, that I had to do all these things to be perfect in order to receive the love. And in that receiving, could I actually trust that you are going to protect and provide for me no matter what? Unless I was the one doing it. Yeah. Right. I was also mixed with trying to be a good steward of what we had. So I want to make sure we were, but that's a control thing. Yeah. Right. Nick was very much like you, living deep down in fear, I would say, making sure all things were right, all things were in control. If he was outside the control, he wouldn't really know what to do. And so a lot of times in the orphan spirit, anger comes out. He wasn't necessarily angry to us, but he would vent, and it could just feel that's not peace. That's not Jesus. That's not love. There was anger because he was scared.
That's what I was going to say. So anger is a secondary emotion. I used to always choose anger because it felt stronger. It felt like a stronger response than what I was feeling on the inside. Yeah. And so I didn't want to say, and there's a quote, I want to say it's C.S. Lewis, but it says something like, I sat with my anger long enough to realize her true name is grief.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't want to be sad because sadness felt like weakness. Yeah. So if I'm angry, I'm tough and you're not going to know that I'm dealing with the sadness. So I was going to ask, what do you know? And if you don't want to share, that's fine because it's Nick's story, but what that underlying the anger was there an underlying emotion?
Of course. So his dad left when he was young. So he didn't have the father figure to show anything more than what he saw around him, really. And he didn't know the Lord until later on in his journey. And then once that happened, it was like, okay, I see you, God, as like God, but do I see you as a father? He didn't know that connection.
Right.
Like literally for him, it was just like, no,
like,
you're God.
I don't even know what a father looks like.
Yeah. Like there's no father. It's like, I am a child, but it didn't correlate to him.
Right.
So that was part of his journey, was like, okay, I'm stripping you because I want you to see you. I want you to see me as a father. Mm-hmm. And when he started, we started connecting into Jamie Winship's Living Fearless. Great book, great process. And he really allows you to draw near to the Lord and be still, no matter if you believe in God or not, but draw into the Lord and be still and ask the Lord, what do you see in me? And Jamie always says that like, it's likely the words you hear, you're like, no, that you can't, there's no way. That's not who I am. That's not how you see me. Because there's a disconnect.
Because they're too big or too positive or what?
Yes.
Like what?
Yes. Like, no, that's not. I haven't done this. There's shame that comes into play. There's guilt that comes there. Like there's all the lies that the enemy has trapped us in for so long in this fog.
So the way that the Lord calls Gideon mighty warrior when Gideon was hiding in a cave.
Exactly.
And Gideon's like, you got the wrong guy.
Exactly. That's it. So that process of then like pulling out those words, and then instead of like the lies that will come in, such as, oh, God's not going to provide for you, Lauren, you're going to have the $300 and then you're going to have to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
He's saying, trust me. I love you. I'm providing for you. You'll be taken care of.
Yeah.
You have to replace your mindset. And a lot of times with the orphan spirit, yes, it can be physical, but it's a lot of the mindset that you have that you have to break free of. And so you have to draw into the Lord to receive those words. And that's really what he wants of you, is to, yes, repent. So you recognized it, you repented from it, but then what? What do you do after that? What was your process like? What is the Lord telling you to do next?
I don't know if I have full instruction on like next, but I think if I go back to my journal, so I'm just going to read the prayer that I wrote.
Yeah, do that.
I wrote, God, forgive me for not fully trusting you or your heart towards me. Forgive me for not feeling like you are safe. I want to be fully loved and allow myself to be fully loved by you. I want to walk in my identity of being your daughter, 100% loved and accepted. Continue to show me how to do that. I renounce the orphan spirit, and I will not walk through life as an orphan, but will take my place as a daughter of the King.
I think he did it. You renounced it.
Yeah.
You severed that. And that is a daily mindset. It's like, well, as you draw into him daily, you have to receive the love he wants to give you freely. He's already done it on the cross.
Yeah.
Right? You're already adopted into the kingdom of heaven. We're all like adopted children, you know?
Right.
And by his blood, that was gone.
Yeah. And we have to choose. I love in this book that I was reading, the guy was talking about how he was in some sort of armed forces and he was volunteering after the war. And he's like, there were orphans everywhere in these other countries that had lost their parents to war and, the tragedies that come along with it. But he said, we would set up these tables and we would have clothes and food and all the things that these orphans needed. And he said, we were there to love, to give freely. And he said they would watch us from afar. And he said, and then they would like find the courage to come up and take the things, but they wouldn't stick around to be loved. They'd take and then they'd run away because it's like, well, I don't like, you can't possibly be loving me and offering these things to me for free. There's a cost. You're going to try to trap me. You're going to, whatever it is. And he said some of the guys that he was in the armed forces with actually adopted some of these kids. And he said they chose, even when they got into a loving home, they were fully adopted, fully accepted, fully loved. He said they would still, when they would eat dinner, like they'd still hide food for later because they didn't think they would be provided for, or they didn't. And he's like, they have to choose to let themselves be fully adopted, like fully loved, fully surrendered. You can keep on your orphan clothes and miss out. It comes back to like the limitation. Like you can stay far away from God, and God, you can only get this close because I'm scared.
Yeah. And what kind of life though is that?
Right?
Like he has so much for you. Right. Every single person listening, he has so much for you.
Yes.
And if we choose, it's our choice because we have the freedom to choose. You chose yesterday. No, I'm trusting God in this. Right. That is a change right there. Right. You shut it down. I'm trusting God in this to let him provide for me. Right. And he did. Yeah. Right. And he will beautifully, overwhelmingly, but we have to make the choice to do it.
Yeah. And I think it's a rewiring of like, okay, I can slip into that. Like I can put on my orphan clothes for a minute and be like, oh my gosh, what do I have to do? Yeah. Like, how do I control this? What's my plan B, C, and D? Yeah. And then it's like, wait a second, I don't have to do that. No. And like you said, there's a process. Yeah. So I do have a question for you about that, but I wanted to share this story, and it brought me joy, but it made me laugh. There was a guy that Aaron did ministry with years ago. Okay. And he was the most, I don't want to say unorganized. He would be like, we're going on a mission trip, and get all these kids to like go on a mission trip. And then Aaron would be like, okay, how are you paying for a hotel for these kids? And he's like, I don't know, God's going to provide. And so much so to where it was like, okay, this seems unwise. Yeah, like it's not just that like, oh, that's faith. It's like, okay, but you have to be wise about things, like, and Aaron goes, the funny thing was time and time again, every time God would show up in a crazy, crazy way, even though this guy was unwise and unplanned. And I'm saying that but the sad part is he ended up losing his family. Like his wife, they divorced, his kids, but like unwise in the way that like if a family, it was, well,
that turned quickly, Lauren.
No, I'm not saying that there's consequences to our actions. Yes. Like he didn't he would, if someone in these apartment buildings that he would love, like if they needed money for electricity and they needed $60 and he had $60, he'd be like, here. But then his family's electricity would get turned off. You know what I mean? Like there was so much, like there was like love, but there was like an unwise part to him. But unwisdom isn't a word. What's the word? Like in what looked like very foolish decisions to me, God would always come through. And I'm like, oh, you would even take my stupidity into account and you're still going to come through? Wow. Like, I consider myself wiser than this person, and you always came through for them when if I'm God, good thing I'm not, I'd be like, you're going to fall on your tail because you didn't think about where you're spending the night with 20 kids. Yeah. And then he would have a random person call out of the blue and be like, hey, I have this like barn dominium thing with all these, like, and it doesn't have anyone there tonight. Do you guys want to stay there?
He just trusted.
Stupid trust. Yes. Stupid blind trust. But I'm like, God, like I can do that in some ways and you're still going to come through. Like you take my humanity and stupidity. Again, not recommending, because this guy paid in other ways for the lack of wisdom that he possessed. Right. So it cost him, but God came through in other ways that I'm like, oh man, like.
Because he had no doubt.
Right.
That's also part of it. It's like, it's easy to trust God. Yeah. Okay. I can say I can trust him, But then when it gets really tight or
Yeah.
it's really hard to trust or your kids are involved and there is pain there, there's a health issue, there's something. Do I trust without doubting?
Yeah.
Confidently know that you are going to show up no matter what.
Yeah.
And I'm going to praise you in this storm.
Yeah.
Until I see it happen because I believe you're going to do it.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
But that's faith. And I think in the end, we're drawing into him, aligning our hearts with him, and just believing him to be what he says he is. And that's digging in the word and knowing his truth. And what his truth is what it's coming out and
Yeah.
reflective of the Bible.
Yeah. So true.
It's really not easy, though.
So
It's not easy.
Well, so that leads me to my question I was going to say, because my revelation of the orphan spirit is fairly new, like a week old.
Yeah.
And you have been familiar for a while.
Yes.
Do you find yourself reverting back to that mindset in certain things, in certain experiences, and how quickly have you noticed a shift as you've journeyed through where it's easier to shift back into, no, God's got this?
Yeah. I think that it is when you're on your high of like, you've figured it out. God gave you knowledge.
I'm free.
I'm free in this.
Until a few days later and you have $300.
Yeah. Yes. Until it really does, like it hits you and the Lord tests you in your face sometimes, or the enemy tries to like steer you off.
Yeah.
I think that those moments, like you can push past, but the more you keep pushing past and the more I'm like, nope, I see that as it is. An example of this is, you can go through this journey. We were going through the journey and we were severing it. We were cutting, calling it out and believing the words God really said to me, because the words God spoke to me were so real. Like, when God speaks to you, he leaves the mark, and that mark is like, oh my gosh, it was only the Lord, and you drawing into his voice and understanding what his voice is. And yet these words were so strong and so beautiful. And
would you be willing to share a little bit? You don't have to share.
He just called me his beloved daughter, and he'll give me these words even now in my journal. It's like, daughter, I'm here. You're mine. You don't have to do anything to prove your love.
Yeah.
You're mine. You could sit there and do nothing. And you sitting there looking at me is all I'm asking of you. It's so simple. Like certain words that have just been so repetitive. Those are the words that when I'm having a hard time, or I'm all of a sudden going into old Melissa, my old self, not my new self, my old self, I am like, oh, no, wait a minute. That's what he says about me. No, that's not who he is. He is for me. He is not against me. No weapon formed against me can prosper. You're constantly having to repeat these verses and the words he's called you up as in so many ways. And so I'll post them all around our room and our bathroom. My husband has it all in his mirror. Everywhere we go, there's a spot. In my car, there's a spot. On my computer, I have to remind myself, even when it gets hard, or in this moment I used to turn into striving Melissa, that's not who I am. And I have to look for the peace. And if there's no peace, that is not of the Lord. He is drawing me back. So I think that, it still can test you, but I think that the more you give it power, it's going to take over. But the less you give that power, that lie, anything, I'm like, no, that's not what we're called to do. The other thing I was going to say is that as the journey has gotten deeper, like it's almost like you can't go back. You want his presence so much because of this beautiful place he has created between you and him. And it's only between you and him. It's not with your husband. It's not with your kids. It's just with you and your Father. Yeah. And there are moments that in the beginning, my dad was not physical. He wasn't physically like loving on me. It was like a jab on the shoulder, fist bump. Anything that was good and spoken out loud was because I earned it, right? Physically, school, sports, anything that drew it, it was like earned, and it was somehow reflective back to him in some way. Yeah. Jokingly, not jokingly, that's just how it was, And then the Lord took me in and gave me this, the very first time he gave me this picture. And it was this at this lake house that we go to with the Saunders. And they have these 2 Adirondacks chairs, and it faces the lake. And it is one of the most beautiful places in my life that I've ever been to.
Never invited me there yet.
Okay, come.
I guess it's more the Saunders.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm sitting there, and it was when he started revealing himself to me even more. And he took me into us sitting in these 2 separate Adirondacks chairs to him bringing me over to his lap and holding me. And that place of being held was something I'd never experienced before. And it was safe. And it was like I could actually breathe, just like you just said. You're breathing in him. And nothing else mattered. I didn't think about where my kids were or what Nick was doing. I looked at the water in this vision and just was held by my Father. And he just spoke life into me. And so that vision I go to all the time. It was the first thing he did, first thing he said, and then into this place of like, okay, I am protected. I am safe. I am in this beautiful place. You are here with me always. You have never left my side. And in my story, that now is even more real, is that he will guard you. He has protected you. He has drawn you in to this time. And so, Lauren, I think you're right. I think Aaron's right. I think that this next season is the unleashing of all that you've been praying for, and all the things ahead of you is for his kingdom. And it's to continually draw you into him, knowing him as a good father and knowing him as a great provider and protector, and all the things that you might have felt unsure of. I think he's just going to continue to put you on that firm rock and foundation and hide you under his wings.
Well, and like it's not about the stuff or the provision or the safety. It's about the relationship that he wants. And I think I would challenge people out there, because for me, I needed a visual too of like, God, show me, like, show me you love me as a father. And it was actually my spiritual grandmother. It was years ago. And she said, I'm going to be praying that the Lord shows you how he feels about you as a father. And actually, John Maxwell the Lord used him.
Yeah.
We were at a conference and he was there, and Aaron and I went up to talk to him, and Aaron said, we use your character development lessons in our soccer ministry. And John took both of us in his arms, and he goes, oh, you guys. And he gave us both the biggest hug, and he kissed me on the forehead. And I was like, oh my gosh, like he as a father was so proud and like safe and loving. And it was just like, I left, I'm like, he doesn't even know me. And I saw this new picture of the Lord, of how he feels about me. And it was so beautiful. And then that was a couple years ago. And so I ended up at the same conference a few months ago, and John was there.
Aww.
And so I went up to him and I just said, hey, a couple years ago, this is what happened. And I said, and you gave me a hug and you kissed me on the forehead, and that changed my view of God. And so, he's an evangelist. He's a pastor by heart. Like the way that he would think, the way that people would normally think that he's impacting people is through his words. But that hug impacted me probably more than words would have.
Yeah.
And so I told him, and he put his hand on my face like a dad would.
Oh, you're trying to get me cry.
And then he said, sweetie, thank you for telling me that. And then he brought me in, he gave me another hug. And I was like, you know what? If I could get a hug like that once a year, I'm great. But just like God has used that picture over the last week, but even slightly over the last like couple years, but even more over the last week of, this is how I feel about you. Like, I am safe. I am proud. I am trustworthy. I love you. And so,
And you're worthy.
yes. And so I think what I would challenge like people out there that they need that picture to ask the Lord. He will give you whatever that picture is for you.
Yeah.
Like he will give you that. He will do that for you. And if it's a vision, if it's a dream, if it's a physical, whatever, like he will do it.
He will. The verse he gave me for this time was found in Psalm 27, 8 through 10. I heard your voice in my heart say, come, seek my face. My inner being responded, Yahweh, I'm seeking your face with all my heart. So don't turn your face away from me. You're the God of my salvation. How can you reject your servant in anger? You've been my only hope, so don't forsake me now when I need you. My father and mother abandoned me, but you, Yahweh, took me in and made me yours. I think it pretty much sums it up,
Yeah.
right? Like our parents are who they are. We're called to honor them and love them.
Yeah.
But they don't represent who God is always. God is loving.
I think we're pretty good parents and we don't represent
No.
what God is all the time.
No, exactly. That's it. That just shows you. It's like, you know, my kids are going to be like, Mom did this.
Yeah. My kids are going to be in therapy all the time, I'm sure.
But like there's something to be said of the Lord saying, it's okay. I've got them.
Yeah.
It's okay. I have you. You're worthy enough. I'm going to protect you always.
Yeah. So good.
Well, thank you for sharing your heart and your process.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
This was good. We'll do more of these
Okay.
as we process through.
Sounds good.
Rope you in. See you.
No, that's so good.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for today's episode. I hope that you have had your own revelation. I hope that you pray that God will show up as your Father. And so don't forget to tune in next week.